Months had passed since the trial and life had begun to settle into a new rhythm for Lily. She now lived with her aunt and uncle, distant relatives who had stepped forward after learning about Samantha's death. Though adjusting to her new home wasn't easy, Lily found comfort in their efforts to make her feel loved and welcome. They encouraged her to talk about her feelings, took her to therapy sessions, and supported her as she navigated the complex emotions of grief. Officer Ryan Carter continued to visit Lily regularly, making sure she was adapting well to her new life. At first, these visits were frequent, almost weekly, but as time went on, they became less structured and more spontaneous. Sometimes Ryan would stop by unannounced with ice cream or take her to the park for a quiet afternoon. Other times, he'd simply sit with her and listen, if she wanted to share something about her day. For Lily, having Ryan around felt like having a steady anchor in an otherwise turbulent sea. One bright Saturday morning, Ryan arrived at Lily's house with a picnic basket in hand. "How does a trip to the park sound?" he asked, smiling warmly as Lily opened the door. Her face lit up instantly. "Really? Can we go right now?" "Of course," Ryan replied, chuckling at her enthusiasm. "Grab your shoes and let's hit the road." The park was bustling with activity when they arrived. Families strolled along winding paths lined with tall trees while kids laughed and played on the swings and jungle gyms. Ryan spread out a blanket under a shady oak tree and unpacked the picnic lunch he'd prepared: sandwiches, fruit, chips, and chocolate chip cookies. Lily wasted no time digging in, her appetite seemingly endless. As they ate, Ryan noticed how much lighter she seemed compared to the early days after the accident. Her laughter came more easily now, and there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. It was a subtle change, but it filled Ryan with hope. Healing wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow, ongoing process. But seeing Lily smile again made all the effort worthwhile. After finishing their meal, Ryan suggested they take a walk around the park. Lily agreed eagerly, skipping ahead of him and occasionally turning back to ask questions about his job or share stories about school. At one point, she stopped near a playground and watched a group of children climbing on a jungle gym. "Do you think Mommy would have liked this place?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft. Ryan knelt down to her level, meeting her gaze. "I think your mom would have loved it here," he said sincerely. "She'd probably be cheering you on from over there." He pointed toward a nearby bench, pretending to wave at an imaginary Samantha. Lily giggled, then grew thoughtful. "Sometimes I still miss her a lot," she admitted quietly. "But I know she's watching me, right?" "Absolutely," Ryan replied without hesitation. "And she's proud of how brave you've been. You're doing exactly what she wanted, to keep being strong." Lily nodded, clutching her stuffed bear tightly. "I try to remember that every day." They continued, walking until they reached a small pond surrounded by benches. Ducks paddled lazily across the water, and the air smelled faintly of blooming flowers. Ryan sat down on one of the benches, motioning for Lily to join him. She did, leaning against him as they watched the ducks together. "You know," Ryan said after a moment, "your mom didn't just leave you with her love. She left you with memories too, all the good times you shared. Those will always be with you, no matter what." Lily tilted her head, considering his words. "Like baking cookies together?" she asked, her tone brightening. "Exactly," Ryan said, smiling. "Or reading bedtime stories or going shopping for milk that night. You'll carry those moments with you forever." For the rest of the afternoon, they talked about Samantha, her favorite songs, her sense of humor, the little quirks that made her unique. By the time they left the park, Lily was smiling again, her heart full of cherished memories instead of overwhelming sadness. In the weeks that followed, Ryan kept his promise to stay involved in Lily's life. He attended her school plays, helped her practice for spelling bees, and even joined her family for dinner on special occasions. Each interaction reinforced the bond they had formed during the darkest days of her life. To Lily, Ryan wasn't just a police officer. He was a friend, a protector, and someone she could always count on. Meanwhile, Ryan found himself reflecting on the case often. It had changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Before, he had seen his job primarily as enforcing laws and keeping people safe. But working so closely with Lily had shown him the deeper purpose behind his badge, to provide hope and healing when others needed it most. Every child deserved to grow up feeling loved and protected, and Ryan vowed to dedicate himself to ensuring that happened, even if it meant going above and beyond the call of duty. One evening, as he drove home from another visit with Lily, Ryan realized he no longer felt weighed down by anger or frustration over the accident. Instead, he felt gratitude for the opportunity to help Lily, for the strength she had shown, and for the reminder that even in tragedy, there could be light. Samantha's final words echoed in his mind once more. "Take care of my baby." He had done just that, and he intended to keep doing so for as long as Lily needed him. Years later, when Lily graduated high school, Ryan was there in the audience, clapping louder than anyone else. As she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she glanced at him and smiled, a radiant, confident smile that reminded him of her mother. Afterward, she ran straight to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ryan hugged her back, his eyes misty. "You did it all on your own," he said gently. "I just helped point the way." And though Lily had grown into a strong, independent young woman, Ryan knew she would always hold a special place in his heart, as would her mother, whose courage and love had inspired them both. Together they had turned a story of loss into one of resilience, proving that even in the face of unimaginable pain, hope could endure. The day of Marcus Doyle's trial arrived weeks later, after countless hours of preparation and investigation. Officer Ryan Carter had spent most of that time gathering evidence, reviewing witness statements, and ensuring every detail was ready to present in court. It wasn't just about securing a conviction, it was about giving Lily closure and honoring Samantha's memory. As he walked into the courthouse that morning, Ryan felt a mix of nerves and determination. This was the culmination of everything he'd worked toward since that fateful night. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Rows of wooden benches lined the walls, occupied by curious onlookers, reporters scribbling notes, and family members seeking answers. Near the front sat Lily, accompanied by Mrs. Harper, who had become a temporary guardian figure for her. Beside them stood Ryan, dressed in his uniform, offering silent support. Lily clutched a small stuffed bear tightly in her lap, her knuckles white from gripping it so hard. Her eyes were fixed on the defendant's table, where Marcus sat slumped beside his lawyer, avoiding eye contact with anyone. As the judge entered the room and took his seat, the murmurs died down, leaving only an eerie silence. The proceedings began, and one by one, witnesses were called to testify. First came the paramedics who had responded to the crash site, describing the severity of Samantha's injuries and their inability to save her despite their best efforts. Then came Carl Jenkins, the mechanic who reluctantly recounted repairing Marcus's damaged sedan shortly after the accident. His testimony was crucial. It directly linked Marcus to the crime. When it was Ryan's turn to take the stand, he recounted the events of the night step by step, finding Lily crying beside her injured mother, collecting evidence from the crash site, tracking down leads until they reached Marcus. He spoke clearly and calmly, making sure to emphasize the impact of Marcus's actions, not just on Samantha but on Lily as well. "She lost her mother because of this man's recklessness," Ryan said, his voice steady but firm. "And he ran away instead of taking responsibility." Throughout the trial, Marcus remained unusually quiet. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a defeated slump. Occasionally, he glanced toward Lily, but she refused to meet his gaze. Instead, she stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable, yet resolute. Ryan admired her strength. At such a young age, she carried herself with a maturity far beyond her years, a testament to the love and guidance her mother must have given her. Finally, it was Lily's turn to speak. Though she hadn't been required to testify, she insisted on sharing her story. Ryan had prepared her carefully, coaching her on how to stay calm and answer questions truthfully without letting her emotions overwhelm her. When her name was called, she stood up slowly, clutching the stuffed bear against her chest like a shield. "Can you tell us what happened that night?" the prosecutor asked gently, crouching down to her level to make her feel more comfortable. Lily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy and I were coming home from Grandma's house," she began. "We were supposed to stop at the store for milk, but then the car hit us." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "Mommy told me to be brave, and she said Officer Carter would help me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Several people in the gallery dabbed at their eyes with tissues, moved by her courage. Even the judge seemed affected, leaning forward slightly as if to better hear her every word. "What do you want to happen now?" the prosecutor asked softly. Lily hesitated, glancing at Ryan for reassurance. He gave her a small nod, encouraging her to keep going. "I want him to say sorry," she said finally, her voice trembling, "and I want my mommy to rest peacefully." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom after that. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face pale and drawn. For the first time since the trial began, he looked truly remorseful. Whether it was genuine guilt or fear of punishment, no one could say, but it was clear that Lily's words had struck a chord. After closing arguments were made, the jury retired to deliberate. The wait felt endless, though in reality it lasted only a few hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and announced their verdict: guilty on all charges. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of relief and approval. Justice had been served. Marcus was sentenced to several years in prison, along with mandatory community service once released. While it wouldn't bring Samantha back, it was a start, a way to hold him accountable for the pain he had caused. As the gavel fell, signaling the end of the trial, Lily turned to Ryan with tears streaming down her face. "It's over, isn't it?" she asked, her voice filled with both sadness and hope. Ryan knelt down beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Yes, it's over," he said. "Your mom can rest now." In the days that followed, Ryan stayed close to Lily, helping her adjust to life without her mother. Social services had located some distant relatives willing to take her in, but the transition wouldn't be easy. Still, Lily showed remarkable resilience, clinging to memories of her mother and the promise that justice had been done. One afternoon, Ryan visited her at her new home. She greeted him with a shy smile, holding out a folded piece of paper. "I drew this for you," she said. Inside was a picture of Ryan standing beside her and her mother, all three smiling under a bright sun. At the bottom, she had written, "Thank you for keeping your promise." Ryan tucked the drawing safely into his pocket, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. He knew he couldn't undo the tragedy that had brought them together, but he could continue to honor Samantha's wishes by supporting Lily however she needed. As he drove away from her house, Ryan reflected on everything that had happened. The case had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, forcing him to confront not just the darkness in others but also the strength within himself. Through it all, one thing remained clear. Wearing the badge meant more than enforcing laws. It meant being a source of light in the darkest moments. And for Lily, Ryan would always be exactly that. Officer Ryan Carter stood outside the bar where Marcus Doyle was rumored to spend most of his nights. The place was seedy, even by the standards of the rough part of town where it was located. Faded neon signs flickered above the entrance, casting an eerie red and blue glow onto the cracked pavement below. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the low hum of murmured conversations. It wasn't the kind of place you went to unless you had no other options, or unless you were looking for trouble. Ryan took a deep breath before stepping inside. His presence immediately drew attention. Heads turned and whispers spread like wildfire among the patrons. He scanned the room carefully, his eyes landing on a figure sitting alone at a corner table. The man wore a leather jacket with a familiar emblem stitched on the back, the same one Ryan had seen earlier in Marcus's apartment. This was him. Marcus Doyle didn't look up as Ryan approached. Instead, he stared into his glass, swirling the amber liquid around absently. His face was pale, almost ghostly under the dim light, and there was a twitchiness to his movements that suggested nerves, or maybe guilt. Either way, Ryan knew this confrontation wouldn't be easy. "Marcus Doyle," Ryan said firmly, stopping, just short of the table. "I need to talk to you." Marcus glanced up briefly, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" he snapped, his tone defensive. Ryan pulled out a chair and sat down across from him without waiting for an invitation. "We know about the car," he said bluntly. "The one you brought to Carl Jenkins' shop. Care to explain why it matches? The description of a vehicle involved in a hit and run?" For a moment, Marcus froze, his fingers tightening around the glass. Then he forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow and unconvincing. "You've got the wrong guy," he said, shaking his head. "I don't know anything about any hit and run." Ryan leaned forward, his voice low but intense. "Don't play dumb with me, Marcus. We've got evidence tying your car to the scene. Surveillance footage places you near the crash site at the exact time it happened. You really think denying it is going to work?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his bravado faltering. For someone who thrived on intimidation, he suddenly looked small and cornered. "Look," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "It was an accident, all right? I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Ryan's jaw tightened. "An accident?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly despite his effort to stay calm. "You left a woman dying on the side of the road while her daughter watched. That's not an accident, that's negligence and cowardice." At the mention of the girl, Marcus flinched visibly. "I panicked, okay?" he admitted, his voice cracking. "I saw the damage and I freaked out. I didn't know what to do." "You should have stayed," Ryan shot back, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You should have called for help instead of running like a coward. Because of you, a little girl lost her mother that night." The weight of those words seemed to crush Marcus. He slumped back in his chair, his hands trembling as he set the glass down. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't know she died." "That doesn't change what you did," Ryan said sharply. "Or the fact that you tried to cover it up. Do you have any idea how much pain you've caused, how many lives you've ruined?" Marcus didn't respond. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as if he were crying, or maybe just overwhelmed by the enormity of his actions. Ryan watched him silently, his mind racing. As satisfying as it might be to let Marcus sit there and stew in his guilt, Ryan knew they needed more than just a confession. They needed proof and justice. "Here's what's going to happen," Ryan said finally, standing up. "You're coming with me to the station. We'll process your statement and then you'll face charges for leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death. Got it?" Marcus nodded slowly, still refusing to meet Ryan's gaze. Without another word, Ryan signaled to two officers waiting outside, who escorted Marcus out of the bar. The other patrons watched silently as they passed, their expressions unreadable. Some might have felt pity for Marcus. Others likely thought he deserved everything coming to him. Ryan didn't care either way. All that mattered was ensuring Marcus paid for what he'd done. Back at the station, Ryan oversaw the booking process personally. As Marcus sat in the interrogation room, his head bowed and his hands cuffed in front of him, Ryan couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Anger, satisfaction, sadness. It was all there, swirling together in a storm he couldn't quite untangle. But beneath it all was a sense of duty. He had promised Lily he would find answers, and now he had delivered. Once Marcus was secured in a holding cell, Ryan decided to visit Lily again. He hadn't seen her since dropping her off at the foster home, and he wanted to update her on the case. More importantly, he wanted to reassure her that progress was being made, and that her mother's death wouldn't go unpunished. When Ryan arrived at the foster home, Mrs. Harper greeted him warmly and led him to the living room, where Lily was sitting on the couch. She looked up when she saw him, her expression lighting up slightly. "Officer Carter," she exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "Did you find them?" Ryan smiled softly, and knelt down to her level. "Yes, we did," he said. "The person who hit your mom's car has been arrested. His name is Marcus, and he's going to face charges for what he did." Lily's eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then, unexpectedly, she threw her arms around Ryan, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. "Thank you so much." Ryan hugged her back, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "I told you I'd take care of it," he said gently. "And I meant it." They sat together for a while talking about what would happen next. Ryan explained that Marcus would go to court, where a judge would decide his punishment. He assured Lily that she wouldn't have to testify or relive the trauma unless absolutely necessary. "Your job right now is to focus on healing," he told her. "Let us handle the rest." Lily nodded, clutching a stuffed animal Mrs. Harper had given her. Despite everything she'd been through, there was a spark of resilience in her eyes, a quiet strength that reminded Ryan of her mother. Samantha may have been gone, but her legacy lived on in her daughter. Before leaving, Ryan promised to check in regularly and keep her updated on the case. As he drove away from the foster home, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. Catching Marcus was a victory, but it wasn't the end of the story. There was still so much work to be done, not just for Lily, but for everyone affected by reckless drivers like Marcus. Ryan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Court cases could drag on for months, and there was always the possibility of appeals or reduced sentences, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that justice was within reach, and that Lily could finally begin to heal knowing the person responsible for her mother's death wouldn't escape accountability. As he returned to the station, Ryan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The badge he wore wasn't just a symbol of authority. It was a reminder of the promises he made to people like Lily. Promises to protect, to serve, and to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And as long as he wore it, he vowed never to break that trust. The morning after the accident, Officer Ryan Carter returned to the crash site. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows over the deserted road. The wreckage of Samantha's car had been towed away, but evidence still lingered. A patch of shattered glass here, scuff marks on the pavement there. Ryan walked slowly along the stretch of road, his eyes scanning every inch for clues that might have been missed in the chaos of the previous night. He knelt down near the base of the lamppost where the car had collided. The impact had left deep grooves in the metal pole, and fragments of chrome trim were embedded in the asphalt nearby. Ryan picked up one of the larger pieces, turning it over in his hands. It looked like part of a vehicle's bumper or grille. If they could match this piece to a specific make and model, it might lead them closer to identifying the driver who fled the scene. As he examined the debris, Ryan's mind replayed Lily's words from the night before. She had described bright headlights coming out of nowhere, followed by the devastating crash. Whoever was behind the wheel hadn't even slowed down. That kind of recklessness infuriated Ryan, but he pushed aside his anger and focused on the task at hand. Finding answers was the only way to honor Samantha and give Lily some sense of peace. After collecting several key pieces of evidence, Ryan drove back to the station. He handed the items over to the forensics team, explaining their potential significance. "See if you can ID the vehicle these came from," he instructed. "We need to know what we're looking for." While waiting for the results, Ryan decided to revisit the area surrounding the crash site. Sometimes, witnesses didn't come forward right away, or worse, they simply weren't aware they'd seen something important. He spent hours knocking on doors and speaking to residents, showing them photos of the damaged chrome trim and asking if anyone had noticed a suspicious vehicle in the days leading up to the accident. Most people shook their heads, claiming they hadn't seen anything unusual. But one elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson offered a glimmer of hope. She lived 2 blocks away from the crash site and mentioned seeing a dark sedan speeding through the neighborhood late that evening. "It was going way too fast," she recalled, her brow furrowed in thought. "I remember thinking someone was going to get hurt." Ryan thanked her and asked if she could describe the car in more detail. Though her memory was hazy, she confirmed. It was indeed a sedan, possibly black or dark blue, and noted that the driver seemed to be in a hurry. While not definitive proof, her account aligned with Lily's description of bright headlights and reinforced Ryan's suspicion that the other vehicle involved was a larger car. Determined to follow up on this lead, Ryan visited local mechanics and auto repair shops. He showed them pictures of the chrome trim and asked if anyone had recently brought in a damaged sedan for repairs. At first, his efforts yielded little success. Shop owners either claimed ignorance or refused to cooperate, citing customer confidentiality. Frustrated but undeterred, Ryan pressed on. Finally, late in the afternoon, he struck gold. A mechanic at a small garage on the outskirts of town recognized the trim immediately. "Yeah, I've seen this before," the man said, scratching his Junta came in a couple days ago attached to a banged-up sedan. Owner wanted me to fix it quick and cheap. Ryan's heart raced. This was the break he'd been hoping for. "Do you know who owns the car?" he asked eagerly. The mechanic hesitated, clearly uncomfortable sharing private information. But when Ryan explained the severity of the situation, the hit and run the young girl left motherless, the man relented. "His name's Carl," he said reluctantly. "Carl Jenkins. He drops off cars all the time, mostly junkers. Said this one got into a fender bender, but now I'm wondering." Ryan thanked him profusely and hurried back to the station to run a background check on Carl Jenkins. What he found wasn't surprising, but certainly troubling. Carl had a history of shady dealings, including ties to illegal street racing rings and chop shops. It was possible he'd repaired the sedan as part of a side job, covering up evidence of the hit and run. Armed with this new information, Ryan tracked down Carl's address and paid him a visit that evening. The man lived in a rundown apartment, building surrounded by graffiti-covered walls and broken streetlights. Ryan knocked firmly on the door, announcing himself as a police officer. After a moment, Carl answered, his expression wary. "Can I help you?" Carl asked, crossing his arms defensively. Ryan held up the photo of the chrome trim. "Recognize this?" he asked bluntly. Carl's eyes darted to the picture, then away again. "Never seen it," he muttered, stepping back as if to close the eye. Dr. Ryan blocked the doorway with his foot. "Don't lie to me, Carl. We know you worked on a car matching this description. Someone died in that crash and a little girl lost her mom. You really want to protect whoever did this?" For a split second, Carl's bravado faltered. His shoulders slumped and he sighed heavily. "Look, I didn't ask questions, all right? Guy brings in a busted-up car, pays cash up front. I don't dig deeper than that." "Who was it?" Ryan demanded. "Give me a name." Carl hesitated, visibly torn between loyalty and self-preservation. Finally, he caved. "Marcus Doyle," he admitted. "That's all I know, I swear." The name sent a chill down Ryan's spine. Marcus Doyle was no stranger to law enforcement. Known for reckless behavior and multiple DUI charges, Marcus had narrowly avoided jail time more times than Ryan cared to count. If he was behind the wheel that night, it wouldn't surprise Ryan in the slightest. With Carl's reluctant cooperation secured, Ryan headed straight to Marcus's last known address. It was a dingy apartment above a bar, its windows boarded up and its entrance littered with trash. Ryan knocked loudly, his hand resting on his holster just in case things turned ugly. When there was no answer, he tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the place was a mess. Empty beer bottles and fast food wrappers covered every surface, and the air reeked of stale alcohol. Ryan called out Marcus's name, his voice echoing through the tiny space. There was no response. Clearly, Marcus wasn't home, but Ryan wasn't about to leave empty-handed. He began searching the apartment methodically, looking for anything that might tie Marcus to the crash. In the corner of the living room, he spotted a pile of clothes partially hidden beneath an overturned chair. Digging through it, he uncovered a leather jacket with a distinctive emblem stitched onto the back, a logo associated with a local gang. Ryan frowned. If Marcus was involved with organized crime, this case could get complicated fast. Just as Ryan was about to leave, something caught his eye on the kitchen counter. It was a set of keys, each one labeled with a handwritten tag. One of the tags read sedan. Ryan pocketed the keys, knowing they could be crucial evidence. With any luck, they'd lead him directly to the car involved in the hit and run. Back at the station, Ryan ran the license plate number linked to the keys through the system. Sure enough, it matched the description of the sedan Carl had repaired. More importantly, surveillance footage from traffic cameras placed the vehicle near the crash site at the time of the accident. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. Despite the progress, Ryan couldn't shake the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. Every step forward felt like a race against time, not just to catch Marcus but to provide Lily with the closure she desperately needed. Her mother's final words echoed in his mind. "Take care of my baby." Ryan intended to keep that promise, no matter what it took. As he reviewed the growing stack of evidence, Ryan allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. They were closing in on Marcus Doyle, and justice was within reach. But the hardest part was yet to come, confronting the man responsible and ensuring he faced the consequences of his actions. For Lily, for Samantha, and for everyone affected by such senseless destruction. The hours passed slowly inside the police station. Lily sat quietly on the couch, her small frame curled up beneath the blanket Officer Ryan Carter had given her. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but now they stared blankly at the floor, as if she couldn't focus on anything around her. Ryan stayed by her side, unsure of what else to do but be present. He didn't want to push her to talk, not yet, but he also knew that time was critical. They needed answers to piece together what had happened earlier that night. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lily stirred. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself before speaking in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "Is Mommy going to wake up?" Ryan turned to look at her, his heart sinking at the innocence in her question. How could he explain something so complicated to a child? He took a deep breath and chose his words carefully. "The doctors are working very hard to help your mom," he said. "But sometimes when people get hurt really badly, it's hard for them to get better right away." Lily nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. She fiddled with the edge of the blanket, twisting it between her fingers. After a moment she asked, "Why did the car hit us?" Ryan hesitated. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for sure. Someone had driven recklessly and left without stopping. That thought made his blood boil, but he forced himself to stay calm for Lily's sake. "I don't know exactly why it happened," he admitted. "But I promise you, I'm going to find out who did this and make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Lily looked up at him, her wide eyes searching his face. For the first time since they'd met, Ryan saw a flicker of hope in her gaze. "You promise?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I promise," Ryan replied firmly. He meant every word. This wasn't just about solving a case anymore. It was personal. He couldn't undo what had been done, but he could fight for justice, and for Lily, he would give it everything he had. With that, Ryan decided it was time to start asking questions. He kept his tone gentle as he spoke. "Lily, I need your help, okay? Can you tell me where you and your mom were going tonight?" She bit her lip, thinking hard. "We were coming home from Grandma's house," she said finally. "Mommy wanted to stop at the store for milk, but we never got there." "Do you remember seeing any other cars on the road?" Ryan pressed. Lily shook her head. "It was dark. I was looking out the window, but I didn't see anything until—" Her voice trailed off and she hugged the blanket closer to her chest. "Until what, Lily?" Ryan encouraged softly. "Until the headlights came out of nowhere," she whispered. "They were so bright and then we crashed." Ryan nodded, making a mental note of her description. Bright headlights suggested the other vehicle might have been larger, possibly an SUV or truck. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. "Did you hear anything like screeching tires or loud noises before the crash?" Lily frowned, concentrating. No screeches. Just a big bang when we hit the pole." She paused, then added, "After that, everything went quiet except for Mommy calling my name." Ryan felt a pang of sadness at her words. Despite the chaos of the accident, Samantha had been thinking of her daughter even in her final moments. It was a testament to the kind of mother she must have been, and it only strengthened Ryan's resolve to bring her justice. As they talked, another officer entered the room carrying a clipboard. His name was Officer Daniels, and he was tasked with documenting witness statements. Ryan introduced him to Lily, explaining that he needed to ask a few more questions to help figure out what had happened. To Ryan's relief, Lily seemed comfortable enough to continue talking. Daniels knelt beside her, smiling warmly. "Hi, Lily. I'm Officer Daniels. Do you think you can tell me what color the car was that hit you guys?" Lily tilted her head, recalling the memory. "It was dark. Maybe black or blue, I'm not sure." "That's okay," Daniels reassured her. "What about the driver? Did you see anyone behind the wheel?" She shook her head. "No, it all happened too fast." Daniels thanked her and jotted down her responses before leaving the room. Ryan watched him go, feeling both frustrated and determined. They still didn't have nearly enough information to identify the driver, but Lily had done her best under the circumstances. Now it was up to him to pick up the trail. Before long, news arrived from the hospital. Ryan stepped outside the room to take the call, bracing himself for the worst. When he returned, his face was grim. Lily noticed immediately and tensed up. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice quivering. Ryan sat down beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Lily, sweetheart, I have some bad news," he began, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Your mom. She didn't make it. The doctors tried their best, but her injuries were too severe." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, spilling over as she buried her face in her hands. Ryan pulled her close, letting her cry into his chest. He murmured soothing words, though he knew nothing could truly ease her pain. Losing a parent was unimaginable, especially for a child as young as Lily. All he could do was be there for her. When her sobs subsided, Lily lifted her head and looked at Ryan with tear-streaked cheeks. "Mommy told me something before she fell asleep," she said quietly. "She said to be brave." Ryan's throat tightened at her words. Brave. That was exactly what Samantha had been. Brave enough to shield her daughter during the crash. Brave enough to entrust her care to a stranger. In her final moments, "Your mom was very strong," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know you'll be just as strong because you're her daughter." Lily sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. She also said something else. She continued hesitantly. She said you'll help me." Those words struck Ryan like a punch to the gut. He hadn't expected such a direct plea, and it filled him with a mix of guilt and determination. Guilt because he couldn't save Samantha, and determination because he owed it to both her and Lily to follow through on that promise. "I will," Ryan said firmly, meeting Lily's gaze. "I'll do everything I can to make sure you're taken care of, Lily. You have my word." For the rest of the night, Ryan focused on arranging temporary care for Lily. Social services were contacted, and arrangements were made to place her in foster care until extended family members could be located. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best option available for now. Throughout the process, Lily remained unusually quiet, retreating into herself as the reality of her loss began to sink in. By morning, Ryan had accompanied Lily to the foster home where she would stay temporarily. The house was cozy and welcoming, with a kind woman named Mrs. Harper greeting them at the door. She introduced herself warmly, assuring Lily that she would be safe and cared for. Though Lily seemed hesitant at first, she eventually allowed Mrs. Harper to lead her inside. Before leaving, Ryan knelt down to Lily's level, ensuring she understood that this wasn't goodbye. "I'll come visit you soon, okay?" he promised. "And I'll keep working on finding the person who did this. To your mom, you don't have to worry. I won't forget about you." Lily nodded, managing a faint smile. "Thank you, Officer Carter," she said softly. As Ryan drove away from the foster home, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Samantha's death wasn't just a statistic or another file to close. It was a tragedy that demanded justice. And, for Lily, whose world had been shattered overnight. It was a chance to honor her mother's memory. Back at the station, Ryan threw himself into the investigation. He reviewed the details of the crash, examining photos of the damaged car and studying the skid marks left on the road. There were no signs of braking from the other vehicle, which suggested the driver had either panicked or deliberately fled the scene. Either way, it was a cowardly act that Ryan was determined to punish. His thoughts drifted back to Lily, sitting alone in a strange house, grieving the loss of her mother. She deserved answers and closure. Ryan vowed to deliver both, no matter how long it took. For her sake and for Samantha's, he wouldn't rest until the truth came to light. The night was quiet, too quiet for Officer Ryan Carter's liking. He had been patrolling the streets of his small town for years, and he knew that silence often meant trouble was brewing somewhere nearby. His radio crackled to life, breaking the calm. Dispatch came through with a report. A hit-and-run accident near the edge of town. Without hesitation, Ryan turned on his siren and sped toward the location. As he approached the scene, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles illuminated the darkness ahead. Ryan parked his cruiser and stepped out, immediately noticing the chaos. A group of people stood huddled together, murmuring nervously as they stared at something on the ground. Ryan moved closer, pushing past the crowd until he saw what everyone was looking at: a mangled car resting against a lamppost. Its front end was crushed like an accordion, and shards of glass sparkled across the pavement. Beside the wreckage lay a woman, her body limp and unmoving. Her clothes were torn and blood stained her shirt. Next to her stood a little girl no older than 10, sobbing loudly. She held onto the woman's hand tightly, refusing to let go even as tears streamed down her face. Ryan felt his chest tighten as he took in the sight. This wasn't just another accident, this was someone's life hanging by a thread. Ryan quickly assessed the situation. He called for backup over his radio, requesting an ambulance and additional officers to secure the area. As he waited, he knelt beside the girl, trying to comfort her. "Hey there," he said gently, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm Officer Carter. What's your name?" The girl sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her sleeve. Lily, she stammered, her voice barely audible over her sobs. "That's a pretty name," Ryan replied, offering her a small smile. "Can you tell me what happened here, Lily?" She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. Instead of answering, she turned to look at the woman lying beside her. "Mommy," she whimpered, squeezing the woman's hand harder. "Please wake up." Ryan followed her gaze and studied the woman more closely. Her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. He reached out to check her pulse, feeling a faint beat beneath his fingertips. She was alive, but barely. Ryan glanced back at Lily, whose tiny frame trembled with every passing second. "Lily, sweetie," Ryan said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Help is coming, okay? Just stay strong for your mom." At those words, Lily looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes searching his face for reassurance. For a moment she seemed to relax, if only slightly. But then the woman stirred weakly, drawing both their attention. Her lips parted, and though no sound came out at first, she managed to whisper something so softly that Ryan had to lean in to hear it. "Take care of my baby," the woman murmured, her voice trembling. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, locking onto Lily's face before closing again. Ryan felt a lump rise in his throat. He nodded solemnly, though he wasn't sure if the woman could see him anymore. "I will," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. Turning to Lily, he added, "Your mom loves you very much, Lily. Do you understand that?" Lily nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She buried her face in her hands, unable to hold back her grief any longer. Ryan pulled her close, letting her cry into his chest. He didn't know how long they stayed like that, seconds or minutes, but time seemed to slow down as the gravity of the moment settled over them. Eventually, the sound of sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of the ambulance. Paramedics rushed to the scene, carrying a stretcher and medical equipment. Ryan reluctantly released Lily, allowing the professionals to take over. They worked quickly, stabilizing the woman and preparing her for transport. One of the paramedics knelt beside Lily, speaking to her in soothing tones as they loaded her mother onto the stretcher. Ryan watched silently, his mind racing. Who could do something like this and leave without stopping? It was reckless, selfish, and downright cruel. Whoever drove that other vehicle had fled the scene without a second thought for the lives they'd ruined. Anger surged within him, but he pushed it aside for now. There would be time for justice later. Right now, his priority was Lily. Once, the ambulance departed, leaving behind only the echoes of its wailing siren. Ryan turned his focus back to the girl. She stood frozen, staring after the vehicle that carried her mother away. Her arms hung limply at her sides, and her expression was blank, as if she couldn't process what had just happened. "Come on, Lily," Ryan said softly, extending his hand. "Let's get you somewhere safe." She hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. Together, they walked to his cruiser, where he opened the passenger door and helped her inside. He climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, glancing at her occasionally as they drove toward the station. Lily remained silent, staring out the window at the blurred lights of the city. When they arrived, Ryan led her to a quiet room reserved for victims and witnesses. He fetched a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, then handed her a cup of water. She accepted it without a word, holding it tightly in both hands. "Are you hurt anywhere?" Ryan asked, concern etched on his face. "Do you need a doctor to check you out?" Lily shook her head, her gaze fixed on the floor. Ryan sighed, unsure of what else to say. He wanted to ask about her father or any other family members who might come to support her, but he decided against it. She'd already been through enough tonight. Instead, he sat beside her, his presence offering a sense of stability in the midst of chaos. After a while, Lily finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Will Mommy be okay?" Ryan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The doctors are doing everything they can to help her," he said. "But I won't lie to you. It's going to be tough." Lily nodded slowly, as if she already understood the truth. She leaned against him, seeking comfort in the warmth of his embrace. Ryan wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as she cried herself to sleep. As he sat there in the quiet room, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, Ryan couldn't shake the image of the woman's final plea. "Take care of my baby." Those 4 words weighed heavily on his shoulders, filling him with a sense of responsibility he hadn't anticipated when he signed up for this job. He vowed then and there to honor her request, not just by protecting Lily, but by finding the person responsible for this tragedy. No matter how long it took, he would make sure justice was served. For Lily, for her mother, and for all the lives shattered by one reckless act.